We can start.
Yeah, we can start.
We can start?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay. Hello and welcome to the fourth and final day of the Dissertation Symposium of the School of Environment and Architecture titled Space, Architecture and the Time of a Virus. My name is Apurva Tarpade and I'm a faculty member at C. We've had 3 long, engaging days with our students and discussants, carefully considering a broad range of questions. And I'd like to start today's panel as I had the other day on Tuesday with a quick recap of yesterday's projects and ideas. Because especially yesterday, I found that a lot of ideas bleed from one discussion to the next. So our first panel was called Urban Memories. We had Nikunj Dedia speaking on the act of remembering and physical traces and intangible memories continuously shaping our domestic environments. Tanishka Rodriguez looks at the ancestral home as a repository of identity and how both cultural practices and spatial practices are transposed in order to bridge distances between the ancestral and remote and the immediate. And Ashika Vijaykar's field of research is Nagar in Mumbai, earlier a camp for refugees of the partition. And she looks at how local memory and the history of a neighborhood play a role in the production and practice of its architecture. The second panel was called Transience and Home. Sanika Kedar considers mobile notions of home as practiced by certain nomadic peoples and as are shaped by material, geography, and time outside of the limitations of property and tenureship. Maitri Moge fictionalizes the experiences of 3 people who are considered runaways in order to uncover the new forms of life that they make for themselves and its spatial manifestation beyond the narrative of immorality usually associated with the spaces that they inhabit. And Swagat Shekhokar explores acts of homing in transient accommodations of hostels and shared apartments, and the ways in which students and young people both share and claim space for themselves. Our third panel, Bodies and Space, saw Bindia Vaghela take forward the idea of claim, this time by individuals living in families, through various visible and invisible acts of appropriation in order to assert their difference, leading to what she proposes is a cellularization of the dwelling. Aparajita Bhaumik looks at the act of dance as something that constructs a sense of space and also gives it emotion. Her research studies different dance forms for the environments that the body is able to produce through performance. And Raksha Srivastav examines the binary of the shared spaces and the private spaces and how bodies and people don't conform to these ideas by looking at the market as a shared space, whereas multiplicities allow for intimate expressions of the individual self. The last panel of the day was on selfing in the city. Priyanshi Bagaria again takes up the idea of intimacy. She looks at the routines of people in chawls, especially women, and how they subvert the ever-present gaze and appropriate space in multiple ways in order to generate and protect a sense of privacy for themselves. Gargi Chauhan interviews single women living in the city to understand the ways in which they navigate the unfamiliar to make homes and belong in new territories. She also looks at how the city and the home collide to form interstitial spaces, which become the most personal spaces for these women. And Foram Shah again speaks through the personal and explores how gender and space construct each other and how women transgress these boundaries to challenge how the home is perceived and used by making for themselves spaces of intimacy and spaces of conviviality. Through all of these discussions, we had larger conversations emerge on the contested nature and terrain of memories, the term nomad and the idea of belonging, and the concept of marginal space and the assumptions we make when we assign people as belonging to these. With that, I'd like to introduce this morning's panel. It is on urban elasticities, and we have Akshay Savla, Divya Vaidya, and Soham Tonwalkar discussing how urban processes allow for elasticities and multiplicities to occur in the city. Like always, I'd also like to introduce you to our panelists for the first set of discussions. We have Vishwanath Kashikar, Kush Patel, and Prasad Khanolkar. Kush Patel is an associate professor at the Avni Institute of Design. Vishwanath Kashikar is an associate professor at the Faculty of Architecture, SEPT, and Prasad Khanolkar teaches at the Humanities and Social Science Department at IIT Guwahati. So with that, I'd like Akshay Savla to go first. Please, Akshay, are you ready?
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Apurva. I'll quickly share my screen.
Sure.
So, am I audible and can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
So, Start.
Yes.
Our thesis topic is about urban artifacts. Aldous in his book Architecture of City suggests two different meanings of city. The first, city is seen as a gigantic man-made object or growing over time and space, and second is urban artifact characterized by their own history and form. He defines urban artifacts as primary elements because these existence has contributed to the morphological and cultural evolution of the city. He says that primary elements are which acts as a catalyst and develop the city and develop and grow the city over time. I draw these definitions of the urban artifacts set up by Rossi. Lefebvre's works focuses on the social side of cities and how people use their social spaces within and across cities. His work on social theory and social dynamic within the cities has indicated that it's people who largely influence the city at the structure and formation of the city. Without the social dynamics, the social structures of the cities and many cities would not be existed. This thesis therefore draws on Lefebvre's idea of cities as lived spaces. And so, urban artifact, which is looked as an utilitarian object by the bureaucratic power, needs to be made culturally responsive is the aim of this thesis. For which I understand an urban condition of one area named Charkop located in the western suburbs of Mumbai city. The practice of everyday life, as Lefebvre says, will help to understand the deep-rooted cultural and social dynamics of the society, which will help me to understand how a specific urban artifact transform and what kind of space and form of these urban artifacts that lend themselves beyond the utility. I have been born and brought up in this area. I connect with the space with its dynamic, which happens simultaneously for me. The method involves collecting deep anthropological stories of everyday inhabitations and appropriations, claims which happens and makes the space. The drawing is I make is like collages, which becomes a medium to assemble varied field notes and everyday stories which make the space. Charkop as an area was constructed as part of the site and service scheme built by the World Bank organizations and Bombay Urban Development Authority for providing affordable housing for very low income group. The government have given the land parcels of land with water, electricity, and sewage connections to the people, and further making cooperative societies and building houses by them was the task. Houses as an urban artifact has gone through tremendous transformation in this landscape. Some people made the front yard of the houses as shops, as there were many women who make small scale businesses like making pickles, papads, taking tuitions, beauty parlor, and many more small scale industries which got formed. The houses has become many elements like shops, shop houses, schools, temples, open ground, etc. The house is a possibility. Sorry. Hello.
Continue.
You can go ahead.
Please continue. I think there was just a slight disturbance.
Okay, sorry. Open planning allowed the people to formulate the space they wanted to be in, the proportion they wanted to grow, and horizontally towards the frontier and up and horizontally. At the same time, apartment type of housing accommodation lacks the such kind of possibilities. People living in apartment types hold a sense of discrimination between people living in the gully. There is a huge wall with trees planted along the compound wall, which was supposed to be a common resource point for everyone. But now, being the architecture of the compound wall has been discriminated to spaces and people in itself. All the houses open themselves in a large open space in the center. The courtyard space is divided into two parts with intermediate thresholds, which is the semi-private spaces where the houses expands itself, and another where when the people of the gully come together and share and that space is known as semi-public space. The courtyard acts as a fortress in which it allows all stages of appropriations and activities to be performed only by the members of the society. Courtyard is also a place where living, earning, interaction, festivals, and many more activities come together, and that is why society acts as a one big family. And then at the same time, the gully acts as a kutum. Gully is where all these fortresses are tied up together. Gully is a lane with a small cozy space with a footpath on either side of the road and becomes the threshold space for housing facing the gully. The space is shaded with trees, allowing adequate amount of light to come in and to make the space livable 24 hours. The gully acts as an extension to the Maidan where there is a multiple correlations and activities which happen. Maidan is an open space where stories of claim, rejoice, celebrations, power, and many more happen. Maidan is an open ground in the center of cricket pitches, basketball, and volleyball courts, which are limited. People make their own imaginative spaces and play accordingly, and make their own area to accommodate the space over a period of time. Apart from the claim of people moving in the Maidan, making the space whenever they want to, Maidan is guarded by the compound wall with trees, making it shaded in around them. The boundary walls gets corroded when the tree breaks up the compound wall and makes a space for children to jump jump and go to the kaki's house for having water. Some of these walls acts as a backdrop for the gola wala to for the people to sit in the shade and enjoy their gola. Government has started converting open grounds to parks and gardens. This reason is that open grounds are very difficult for old people to walk in. Nagar Sevak and many other ministers have come up with the idea of making open ground by making parks and gardens, wherein the entrance to the park has a gateway forming from an aluminum panel. There is a board which specifies regulations which have been constantly watched by a security guard. The parks and its surrounding from all the sides with concrete walls and high steel grills. Then a walkway running along the park with the palm trees and lights to walk. The second layer inside the park is a series of benches facing the park for the old age people to gather and time pass. The park has lot many limitations of practice because of the architecture from which is very restrictive. Practicing religion plays an important role in the lives of the community. Some people from the community came together, forming a place for worship along the corners of the gully under a banyan tree. Over a period of time, more and more people come together and formulation of a shrine which happened. Danpeti played an important role in the making of these shrines and community practices within the space. People from Mandal, a group of people looking after the temple and its work, collecting chanda and getting sponsors from the gully, helped them to maintain the temple at the same time carrying different programs for the people of the gully. Eventually, the small roadside shrine got converted uh, into a temple. Eventually, so the compound wall of the building thickens itself and includes the temple in itself, responding to the corner. As the religion played a sense of belonging in the people's mind, slowly the spaces around the gully, around the temple, along the compound wall, started getting appropriated by people of the gully. The curved corners played a major role in formation of the spaces, allowing free movement at the same time as an offset of the road to display and occupy the volume. All gullies lead to a main road, which becomes a central spine connecting all the areas. The main road, as a mixture of politics of exchange, claims, appropriations, affordance, illegal, legal, duplicate, non-duplicate, or organic, non-organic, today, tomorrow, temporary, fixed, and many more. The edges of the main road has either mangroves or apartment buildings with high compound walls, allowing the footpath densely covered. In the morning, because of the shaded space, the curved edges of the gully, there are many stalls and activities start coming up using the compound wall as a space to display. By adding different elements or appropriations, the non-used space, afternoons, the shop closes and some of the telawalas either slip and take nap on the footpath or go to the maidans or gardens to spend their afternoon. During the festivals, the street acts like an elastic, taking in loads of people on the main road. There are checkpoints of towers made of bamboo at the main road junctions to splendor flowers and colors on the murti. The pandals and the procession is highly led by the Naga Sevak and other ministers in the process of bringing people together. The evening is where the edges swell and the market appears. The shop in the building tries to open and expand themselves on the road, and there are thelawalas which start claiming and occupying spaces of the footpath under the tree or either next to the compound walls. People place lights so that they can be seen in dark. The zone B is the last dead end of the main road. The space has a similar conditions. Here, a temperature is relatively low because of the mangroves, and the people appropriate space in different ways. The shade which gets generated because of the trees because of the trees are used to used as a private space, and a road, as it does not have any level difference, allow people to walk freely, jog, interact, cycle, and many more things to happen. Main road is an extension to the Maidan, which allows many things to happen. The last and the final type is the estuary. The marshy land was left and served as the outskirts of the Charkop area. Being a soft marshy space was always excluded and used for dumping all the wastes from the Charkop region. Some people used the space packed them into gunny bags and started reclaiming lands to make houses and shops, etc. People formed communities and groups which were held by the local guns and Nakasevak to create public toilets and chalk for the community gatherings, celebration, leisure, and rest and many more. The shaded space was a place where the people rest their rickshaws, get parked at the corner space, and get the surrounding space occupied. The urban artifact and the society coexist with each other. They retrofit, reimagine, accommodate, remove, reconstruct, and construct each other over time and space. Urban artifact is in certain sense allows spaces for cultures to accommodate themselves, and that accommodations can be visual, metaphysical, physical, temporal, permanent, and many more. These objects provide voids for people to hang, rest, climb, and do many things to appropriate spaces and make culture. There are certain forms of urban artifact which allow certain and certain don't. There is a lot to do with the edge conditions of urban artifact and the voids they produce space like. Partially shaded space which works better over the dark and densely dark dungeon space. A low-heighted wall with views as a partitions over high walls and long-hearted edges. Smaller volumes over heavy volume spaces are much easier to correlate to people and make people uh, relatable to each other. Curved corners and curved corners are much better because it gives them recessions for people to come and take the space over a sharp corner edges. Space to grow and freedom to configure is something which lags in some of the spaces in the city. And the hard surfaces over the marshy surfaces because people like to walk on hard surfaces and not. The question further of the thesis asks to how can urban artifacts can be designed as scaffoldings for appropriation and claims to take place. What specific architectural features of the scaffold will help to retrofit certain existing urban artifacts or make new ones to create spaces which will allow appropriations and cultures to generate. Uh, Thank you.
Thanks, Akshay. Next, we have Divya Vaidya speaking. Divya, are you ready?
Yes, I'll just share my screen.
Divya, you have a full 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Divya and I'd like to present Elasticity. In spite of being this dense and compact, the city of Mumbai is able to stretch itself to hold more during times of added events and festivals. Every year, the festival draws near, the neighborhoods in the city undergo a rapid flux. They start attracting attention, people, and resources like magnets. When it is time, it starts transforming to prepare and procure resources for the festival, till it is dismantled and absorbed back into the city. It gestates and holds a whole plethora of energy, belief, rituals, colors, chauvinism, aspirations, desires, power relations, and fear, all overlapping till it finally gives birth to the grand event. I then ask, what is the nature of the urban form that contributes to the elasticity, the stretch of space? This thesis is an attempt to study how urban nodes within Mumbai behave during times of added events, how spaces are altered in order to accommodate these swellings, and the changes they induce within public behavior. The urban space was documented keeping three aspects in mind: social, logistical, and spatial systems, overlaid with power and emotion dynamics to demarcate the seen and unseen folds that make the city elastic. The thesis documents the festival of Ganesh Chaturthi in the neighborhood of Girgaon in South Mumbai and the various complexities that make it. The recurring calendar. The innermost circle charts the space and time the festival takes over the years, which ranges from 3 to 4 months every year. Further zooming into the year of 2019, that's the second circle, where July and August go into the preparation for the main event that happens in September. The third circle charts out various activities that take place in the month of the event. The orange marks 11 days of the main event, the yellow marks the transition period, and the blue marks the 4 days required for quick dismantling of the structure that holds the event. The 11 days of the event have pujas, Mahaprasad, promoting eco-friendly practices and female-dominated engagements that are open and catering to all, on an average of 1,000 people attending per day. The 2 weeks following the Visarjan are occupied with events in interest for residents only, like spardhas or competitions, performances by residents, orchestra, and fun fairs. These cater to an average of 300 people per day. This annual calendar plots when different actors are in motion over the year. The yellow marks the preparatory period and the orange marks the time in action. The planning and advertising committee start meeting regularly since April. Since the idol here is made in situ using sharu mati or clay, the mandap and idol making start 2 months in prior to the event. The security is minimal in this time, but yet active to ensure no one sees the murti and the process before the main days. Even though the dhol, tasha, and banjo are required only on the first day and the last day, their practices begin in August, usually under bridges or rented basements. It is interesting to note that the gestation of various layers happens steadily over 2 months, but as the event is over, it takes only very little time for the space to shrink back to normal. This diagram explains the layer of governance that organizes this event. The Ganeshotsav Mandal is led by the Adhyaksh or chairperson, the Pramukh Karyavai or the manager, and the Khajindar, that is the treasurer. It also has various other teams like the Karyakarni Sadasya, that is the female members, Jahirat Samiti or outreach team, Vargini Samiti or fund collection team, Mandap Samiti or structure team, and Karyakartas, that is the field team, all supported by the Hit Chintaks or well-wishers. With little interference from the government, the festival is solely organized by residents of the lane. This temporal governance looks at all aspects and negotiates with local authorities for permissions to accommodate more. They efficiently retain legitimate authority through careful engagement with local governing actors like police, municipal corporation, and firefighting teams. This is the dense neighborhood of Girgaon in South Mumbai, where I zoom into the Nikadari lane where Girgaoncha Raja sits. This is how the lane looks when the festival is not in motion. About 2 months before the event, the construction of the structure begins. A trolley is placed in the center on which a tripod of 3 iron rods is placed that becomes the skeleton for the idol. The structure is covered by tarpaulin sheets completely to prevent anyone from seeing the murti or the process before the event. The murti is completely eco-friendly, made from hay and sharu mati or clay. This method requires alternate layering and drying to eventually fill cracks to smooth the surfaces to paint on. It takes nearly 2 months to complete this process. As the time of the event draws near, the temporary structures are built. The mandap where the idol is placed is at the end of the lane, emanating a certain power superiority in its presence. The sides of the lanes are adorned with banners, promotional banners, and lights hung on bamboo poles. The start of the street is marked by a huge bamboo portal that too is covered with promotional banners. Similar portals are placed at regular intervals on the main road to welcome visitors in the neighborhood. The vehicles that are usually parked inside the lane are moved to make space for the crowd and festivities. Few two-wheelers yet occupy inside the lane. Most of the vehicles are parked right outside the lane with a sticker given to prevent towing and fines. But by doing so, the width of the main road narrows, and that could cause troublesome traffic. Once the event commences, dedicated queues of worshippers line up both in the day and at night, with the entrance of the mandap dotted with chappals. The lane, on the other hand, is dotted with smaller vendors selling handmade toys, eco-friendly goods, food items, etc. This slide talks about the monetary transactions that take place, where 63.6% of the income comes from voluntary donations and 17.9% from advertisement records. These funds are collected from shops in the neighborhood like cardstock shops, paper marts, stationeries, mobile stores, etc. Although initially it started with the Jahirat committee approaching them, but over the years they have voluntarily and increasingly continued to fund this event dear to their beliefs. This signifies a close-knit network of belief and faith that drives these voluntary compromises. The balance and Dan Peti collection are used for social causes like blood donation camps, Shishya-vrittis or scholarships, food, clothes, and donation camps, promoting eco-friendly practices, etc. This slide talks about the expenses, where the expense chart shows that nearly 44.6% of the money goes into mandap and decoration, and around 17.1% goes into the materials for the Shri Murti, followed by other smaller expenses. On the 11th day, that's the Visarjan, the lane stretches immensely, accommodating a couple thousands of people that eagerly come for the banjo dhol tasha. Not only residents, but also people from the entire neighborhood, their friends, and also people who have moved out from this place all come together for this Visarjan ceremony. The Visarjan route follows nearly a 2.72 kilometers long route. This route has 15 halls, each marking gathering spots, culturally and socially significant nodes in the neighborhood. For example, the second last spot, a halt, is a diverted path to pay respect to a murtikar who met with an accident while saving a child. Due to the number of halts and the sheer magnitude of the number of people coming along, this journey that starts in the day takes around 15 hours to complete. After a 15-hour-long route, the procession of the Ganpati finally reaches Girgaon Chapati at sunrise. To prevent the wheels of the trolley from getting stuck in the sand, metal sheets are picked and placed below the tires. The murti, once submerged, takes a couple of hours to dissolve. Once the visarjan and cleaning up is done, the setup is dismantled rather quickly and collapses to fit on the small trolley that is maintained and reused year after year. Concluding the fold, I'd like you to imagine throwing something heavy at two things, a paper and a cloth. Paper is hard. When you throw something against it, it will tear and go down instantly. But if you throw something similar on a cloth, it will hold. The urban form behaves very similar to this. It is a mesh of instances that happen every day. When a huge stress is thrown at it, it is able to hold, stretch, and be elastic. The neighborhood starts swelling and stretching and folds layers of systems and negotiations to itself to accommodate this stress. What is it that makes it cloth-like? There is a physical dimension to the urban form, and there is an unseen dimension that is made of several layers of governance, financials, organizational, and social. These layers are not necessarily visible or physical in nature. These layers overlap each other, thus making the space elastic. The space becomes elastic because of the ability of the form, which is able to be fabric-like. These festivals are examples where the urban form transforms and becomes elastic. This elasticity is produced by the overlapping of not only the physicality of the space, but also the soft non-physical entities. In an area like Girgaon, when redevelopment is spoken about, the image of the area transforms into a series of tall structures and high-rises. I then wonder if the space would be the same. Would it yet allow to be the form to be elastic and accommodate these added events and festivals? Maybe not. The generic idea of the redevelopment would have this space transform in a way that the ground floor becomes parking lots and barricaded. The people living here would move outside. Festivals would be celebrated in closed spaces and they would lose its liveliness. Each of these would become these gated entities that would be very rigid. Can redevelopment then be rethought so that the urban form does not lose its elasticity? Thank you.
Thank you, Divya. Soham, are you ready with your presentation?
Yeah, I'm ready.
You can start now.
Yeah, just give me a minute. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
I'll just present it. Yeah. Hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Soham Tonwalkar, and the topic of my thesis is hybridscapes, topography of spatial overlappings in the Chakop neighborhood. To give a brief about the site, the Chakop has a site and service scheme which was planned by MHADA. So the division of plots was decided, but the activities which are emerging are up to its residents. The form of the space changes when the work activity and the domestic household activities are blended together. This form of space also creates new events and acts when there is when there is an exchange of culture. The neighborhood is inherently hybrid because of the constant communication which the space provides and the nature of curiosity among the people to share or exchange. With this, the aim of the study is to explore the spatial form of hybrid spaces. The objective is to establish a relationship between spatial configuration and the multiplicity of activities or hybridity in the Charkop neighborhood. With this, the question which I'm looking is, what is the spatiality of hybridity? To look at these pointers, the first chapter I was looking was about the idea of secure neighborhood. Since all the houses are built on ground, it allows easy access to the street. The idea of boundary wall or the need of any security guard is not required because of the notion of watching over each other. Hence, one of the trust issue to send their kids freely to play in the neighborhood without any caretaker is seen here. Because of this, the societies are self-managed and maintained. Moving on to the next point, the further question was, how does the idea of privacy work in this neighborhood? So the idea of privacy is not much seen enough in the Charkop neighborhood. This is because of the notion of not keeping oneself isolated from the outside community. There is a constant awareness among the people there's a constant awareness among the people actively moving and trying to contact with each other. This daily contact and interaction narrow down the idea of privacy. The housing also partially enables everyone to visually see around this neighborhood. From keeping doors and windows open throughout the day to go and enter someone's house without asking to come in is the nature of this fairly involved neighborhood. Identifying the area of concerns, I'm looking under three scales from an individual house to the community level. The first scale is of individual house where a shop is given on rent. The second one is the cluster of houses where a courtyard space is formed in between and the series of terraces connected together. The third scale is infrastructure or connectors like chowks and junctions. I'm using the method of collages of drawings and photographs, which will allow the following pointers. Number one, it will allow to layer different activities together. Second, it allows to conceive the aesthetics of hybridity. Third, it allows to show incontinence in work and life. The use of space is under two categories. The first one is the daily experience in the morning and in the evening period, and the second one is the festival day. Looking at the first scale of an individual house, this drawing speaks about giving a part of the house to rent. The owner of the house lives at the back and the front is given on the rent for ironing clothes. It is a small shop of 3.5 meters by 2.5 meters connected to the internal road where the shop is always involved with some other activity. The footpath at the front is used as an open storage to keep water drum, and this act of blocking speaks about claiming the unclaimed space. The shopkeeper kept a small bench outside for anyone to sit if the ironing of clothes is going on. When one person accesses it, it allows the neighbor to come together to talk and have a conversation about anything. Moving inside the small accessible space, wooden shelves on the wall to keep clothes, hangers and unironed clothes everywhere occupy this space. To go back home and prepare for meal causes a waste of time. A small portable kerosene stove is used to cook the food. Three people work and look after the shop. When one person gets tired, he makes a small space at some corner to take a nap. The passage next to the house is an entrance for the society as well as for the back space. Such working and open shops allow the society to keep its gates open, and there is no need for any security guard. The second scale is about the cluster of houses. This drawing speaks about the use of middle space in the afternoon period. Since the water supply timing in the neighborhood is from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., all the washing and the cleaning activities of utensils, clothes, and other things are done between this timing. Since the middle space is open to sky, we get direct sunlight where it is easy enough to keep it to dry. Now, since most of the women do household work, some of them are involved in making food products like papad, pickles, and many other more, which is later kept to dry in the same courtyard. As evening approaches, the courtyard becomes more playful, especially for children and teenagers. The space serves as a small playground where they play cricket, badminton, and many more. It is also a big cycling track for many of them. People coming back from their offices get their own parking space for their two-wheeler vehicles in front of their houses. Terraces also become active enough when the sun sets and the climates get subtle enough to have a cup of tea with an evening sunset view. A big open space also serves as a better gathering and organizing space for events and festivals. Hence, the atmosphere of such celebration creates a different welcoming realm in the society. The lighting during the Diwali creates a different environment in the society where colorful light spreads everywhere. Pleasant chaos is created because of the excitement, preparation, constant movement, firecrackers, and all of this is subtle by the rangolis and diyas in front of their houses, which creates a welcome gesture in the society. Festivals like Krishna Janmashtami, where all young youth celebrates, need a preparation of big thick rope with all the decorations and terracotta pot which is tied at two opposite ends of the houses, either on the terraces or on the window grill. It forms a big connection and then later human pyramid is formed to break the matka. The second scale of the cluster of houses is the series of terraces connected. So when the family grows, the need for more space is required, and the structure of the house changes from ground floor to ground plus one and terrace. When these houses are connected to the internal lane, cannot perform the same activity as compared to the houses inside the society. Here, the practice of drying clothes and homemade food products change from courtyard in the society to the terraces of outer houses. Enough space is available to make a small garden on the terrace. When a series of these connected houses with terraces create their own garden, it visually looks like a small joint miniature garden from the top. Most of the morning and the afternoon time spent inside the house. If seen in the morning period, vegetable and fruit vendors take over the street and it creates a small market itself. After a period of time, by noon time, a garbage collecting truck enters the lane, and due to the limited road space, no other vehicle can pass through it. All the waste fallen on the road by these vendors is cleaned and a self-service work where every house is supposed to throw their garbage in a common garbage bin outside every society, where later the sweeper collects it. As the evening approaches, the terraces become more active, especially for women and old age people in the family, where the space serves as a resting space and the sunlight are not and the sunlight is not sharp. There are parapet walls in between these houses, but when people from the neighbor houses come together on the terrace, they share snacks and with discussions and other pastime talks, it doesn't feel like separating wall in between. The road also performed differently in the evening by the snack vendors. A walking track with pets and playing space for children is seen actively in the evening period. Speaking on the third scale of the infrastructural connectors like chokes and junctions, connecting lanes, connecting internal lanes form a major role to keep circulation throughout the neighborhood. Most of the time, these junctions have a small temple built and maintained by the people living in that specific lane. These junctions act as a small connecting space and also known as an engaged space. Being the most active space, a busy atmosphere is seen from morning itself, where vegetable and fruit vendors take over these junctions on footpaths, street edges, and set up their stalls. So it forms a meetup time and small spaces for women to discuss what to cook for the entire day. Many of these sellers who carry small basket on their heads go to every society to sell their groceries. Here a doorstep, fresh vegetables and fishes are delivered, and it sometimes helps for the housewives who is more engaged in the household work in a limited time. An unclaimed space also forms at these junctions where activities are not much performed. Such unclaimed spaces are either used for parking or junk is dumped, where later the scrap dealers collect it. Living in such overengaged community, festivals are celebrated where everyone is involved in it. Talking about one of the festival like Holi, a bonfire needs to be prepared. These junctions here is the only space where such celebrations can be organized. Young and healthy people can manage their whole celebration by standing and constantly moving to make it more active. But for old age and other handicap, benches and chairs are organized around the bonfire. Those who can visually see from their houses look from their windows and terraces. Sometimes a seating arrangement can be made in front of the footpath in front of their houses. At times, when the space of the bonfire is covered up, the parking space is taken over by the unclaimed land. Most space is also available at these junctions to organize any sports events. Every year, a gully cricket tournament is played, and it is one of the most active events where all the people participate. This is mostly organized when the Satyanarayan Puja is held every once a year near the temple of the junction. To overall speak about the conclusion of this neighborhood, the overall study of hybridity in the Charkov neighborhood has emerged because of the nature it has adapted by communication and mixing different activities. Hybridity has been evolved with a lot of different interventions that have come up by the residents themselves and now is an important part of living. The idea of togetherness and knowing each other, understanding their neighbors, and involving in their daily living, sharing, claiming, and trust form over a period of years has made this neighborhood a hybrid scape. Thank you.
Thank you, Soham, and thank you, Akshay. Thank you, Divya, for sharing your work with us. And just as some quick summarizing notes, we had Akshay open up Rossi's idea of an urban artifact, and he looks at urban form as something that is beyond its conception of utilitarianism, and he conducts a very interesting spatial ethnography where he looks at ideas of porosity and multiple claims being possible, being encouraged, and beyond that, being provided for as well. And he uses collages as a means of assembling piecemeal fragments and snippets, conversations, different forms of the idea of the drawing itself in order to be able to speak clearly about this density that he encounters in this urban form in his neighborhood. And Divya as well, her form of the drawing itself addresses the concept of elasticity, where she uses she harnesses the warp as a method to speak of this accommodatory nature of space. And for her, the city is an organism that swells and then subsides and then absorbs that swell back into itself, especially when the festival happens. And she makes the case that urban form, although it is rigid, is enmeshed with social layers and with organizational layers, governmental layers that make the urban form into a mesh. And this is what makes this mesh malleable. And we had Soham, who looks at how the built form is taken over and hybridized for multiple forms of inhabitation in a planned neighborhood. And this is a neighborhood that is dense with social networks, and the urban form gets integrated to serve these networks. And Soham again uses a different form of the collage to specifically highlight this hybridity that he describes. And later on, he traces over these collages in order to understand the form that allows for this kind of hybridity. All three look very closely at ideas of claims and urban form. They are critical of planning practices. And I think they make the case to consider newer ways of imagining public spaces that are nuanced and can accommodate multiple scales of claims. So with that, I'd like to invite our respondents to present their thoughts. Vishwanath, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Okay. A very interesting set of three presentations, and I was sort of furiously making notes because there were many places where, in fact, at some places I wanted to stop and ask a few questions as well. Um, so let me go one by one and then give my common comments. Akshay, starting with the idea of looking at it as an urban artifact and then the idea of the lived space. Um, Very interesting. What caught my attention while you were presenting was when you were describing the Maidan turning into a garden and how through the act of making the compound wall and a specific public entrance and the putting up of rules in front of the gate completely transforms that space. And you also talked a little bit about the roadside shrine becoming the temple, which to me also was is a very interesting transformation that we see in the city today. Now, so that got me thinking about how do we view public space, and whether we are talking of people being makers or creators of spaces. By makers or creators, I don't mean physical makers, but more in tune with what Lefebvre says about lived space, that when you have a roadside shrine or when you have a Maidan and 10 kids go and play there, they are actually making that play space when they are there in that Maidan. And when they recede, the space returns back in some ways to its original state. Whereas what you're noting is that everywhere this is getting transformed into a situation where people are consumers of spaces. That the garden with its compound wall and gate exists, irrespective of whether people are there or not. And then people are expected to go and consume public space. And and I think that's one very interesting strand that I saw in what you were trying to talk about. And the other thing that I'm wondering based on that, is it that when you're talking of lived space, especially lived space, shared lived spaces or urban commons as we would like to call them, is it that individual claim is weak but collective claim is strong when we are talking of these kind of spaces? And bureaucracy is transforming it into a situation where the manifestation of claim is independent of people. That, you know, there is a garden, there is a gate, a door, and a set of rules. So the even though it is called a public space, the claim along with the boundary has been manifested independent of the people. And I think this I would suggest a set of very sharp drawings about what are these urban uh, indicators or markers that allow this transformation to happen would be very critical. And I say this because I think somewhere in the end you talked about of the step ahead, you were talking about the idea of the artifact and to see how the artifact can be designed or thought of keeping in mind everyday life. Uh, Say some sort of, I mean, a lot of people do these urban installations, and one hopes that people will lay claim over it. But that is one route to take, where you're saying that how can the artifact itself allow for lived space. But to me, the counter argument or another way of looking at it would be that how do we make urban whatever that manifestation is, a compound wall, a paving, a utla, whatever, uh, how does one make it so that the claim cannot be independent of people living in that space? To me, that I find that question very fascinating. Um Moving on to Divya, to me, towards the sort of second half of your presentation, when you started giving that analogy of a paper and a cloth, I think that is a very powerful analogy, and I would suggest you make more drawings of that analogy. uh, I mean, not drawings of paper and cloth, but the city as a paper and the city as a cloth. Couple of interesting things that came up when you gave that analogy was when you talk of, and I was visualizing that people are holding this cloth at four ends and someone drops a heavy weight in the middle, which in your case is Ganesh Chaturthi. So Ganpati, the god, lands in this cloth and he's very heavy. But two things happen. One, the edges of the cloth come closer, right? Because they also have to accommodate for the weight. So I was wondering, in your case, and I'm mixing the idea of drawing with the observation of the city itself. For that Ganesh Chaturthi in that place, where is the edge of the cloth for you? Is the edge of the cloth where the gully meets the main road? But then that cannot be true because the cars are kept outside that gully, right? So the cloth should extend there. Should I extend the cloth all the way up to the Visarjan place? Because that is the limit of elasticity. And so that is one question I would like you to think about. Where is the edge of the cloth? And the second set of observations, which I think would also be very pertinent, is the cloth or the rubber band loses elasticity over a period of time, right? So I think the other key aspect of talking of it as elastic is not only that it stretches to accommodate the event, but very importantly, it comes back to its original state, which you did mention a little bit when you were talking about the schedule. You were talking of how after the event itself, very quickly it comes back. But I'm wondering whether there are some permanent effects of the fact that the Ganesh Chaturthi is held in that street. Have some permanent shops been created, or do people not park their car permanently where the Ganesh Pandal actually is? Because there is some notion of the remembrance of Ganpati being there. And year on year, do you see any sort of indicators of that change? One thing that you mentioned, which I found very curious, is that you were talking of that trolley. That trolley is permanent, right? And it has to be parked somewhere. Now that is one artifact which remains. So that to me is where it remains is a very interesting question. So two questions or two further directions for you. One is, where is the edge of the cloth, and what part of the cloth does not come back to its original form. Yeah. Uh, Coming to Soham, now I like the way you structured it. You went first with the level of the individual house hybridity at that level, then hybridity at the cluster, and then the larger level. I was wondering, if you make a drawing, if you have already made observations, if you make a drawing of how negotiation happens for the transition, like you were giving example of how at the level of the immediate outside of the house, it is used for drying clothes also, but people are drying maybe papads and other things. It is also used for playing, and sometimes vehicles might also pass through. So I'm wondering that if you could describe a situation where the papads are on the floor, or the cloth is being dried and it has to be shifted because someone has come to play. What is the aspect of spatiality that allows that negotiation to happen easily? Is it because the woman or the person inside the house is able to see from the window a car coming or kids wanting to play, and therefore is able to quickly go out and remove that papad that is drying, or the clothes that is drying? So to me, when you want to make that connection between the space and form with what is allowing it to be hybrid, or the hybridity, to me the key is when the transition happens. So you have already documented that the spaces are being used in multiple ways. So rather than either making separate drawings for separate space uses, or making a collage where all uses are put together, if I somehow were to be able to make a drawing of the period of transition, when the cloth has to be removed and the car has to pass, or when the vehicle has to be removed and the thread has to be put for, a rope has to be tied for Janmashtami, that could actually, I was thinking, make that connection better. So what I also found interesting in this panel is that in very different ways, all three of you are asking the same question as to how do we look at urban space in the city today, and do we look at it from a physical perspective, do we look at it from a use perspective, was one kind of question. And the second kind of question was, what is the tension and the elasticity that urban space provides? Yeah. uh, just one last comment I had for Divya, at least in your presentation, that last bit was very sudden, where you said that when you have these multi-story buildings, I don't know what will happen. It will all sort of fizzle out, etc. I would suggest you make sharper. I would suggest you don't start with a bias, and you observe that phenomena also carefully. Yeah, those were my comments.
Thanks, Vishwanath. Akshay, Divya, Soham, would you like to respond to Vishwanath first? Or would you prefer it if we took questions from all our panelists?
Can I?
Divya wants to.
Yes, Divya, please.
Thanks, Vishwanath. I'd like to respond to the questions you asked me, and also one note that you made for Akshay's presentation, where you said that can these urban artifacts be designed? In my experience, or whatever I've seen till now, I think that the urban artifacts are these objects that are like follies that are placed, and then they transform by the way they're appropriated or used by the public over time. So the quality of them becoming an artifact is the layers of these uses that act as like pastiche over time, is what gives them the quality of artifact. I think maybe that is it. And answering the question of where is the edge of the cloth. So while drawing or even figuring out the extents of this one particular case study that I did. Every lane in Girgaon has this one particular main Sarvajanik Ganpati that sits there. And there are these, so then if you look at it, there are these multiple cloths that come overlap. So it's not only this one structure, or it's not only this one actor is not only contributing to one particular Ganeshotsav Mandal, but also like multiple, like say 2 to 3 at a time. So I myself was confused whether I should look at the entire neighborhood with only this one particular piece of cloth or only this one lane that had to struggle, or that was the extent. And when you said that what happens, the equal importance should be given to when the cloth or the rubber band loses elasticity. So while I was doing my readings for the same to understand these concepts, I read Fold by Deleuze, where he talks about, for example, if you have a piece of paper and you create multiple folds at it, and then when you unwind the paper, for example, when you're doing origami, the paper is left with these creases, and they are these set of experiences or learnings that are left in the space. So one thing that is that after talking to and taking interviews also, that the people said that was, over the years, these are the whatever I've spoken about are what are the negotiations and changes that they have done. So for example, the vehicles moving outside, initially that was not organized. They used to park it all over the neighborhood wherever they get space, and then slowly and eventually they started systematically parking them and giving stickers. So they tried and tested stickers for like 3-4 years. 1 year they stopped it, and then they started it again. So there were these series of trial errors that were sort of there. And the other permanent effects, so the trolley has the main permanent effect as such, because that space that is the trolley requires never changes. That is exactly like the trolley goes closer to the building, and when the Ganpati, the festival and the manufacture or the construction starts, it just moves, takes an offset from the building, but that stretch is where it shrinks back to. Thank you.
Thank you, Divyan. Thank you. Soham, would you like to go next?
Yeah. So thanks, thanks Vishwanath for that comments. But to continue with one of the Divya's example which she gave on the fold by Deleuze. So what I personally took from that example was to look at that fold of paper with two views. The first view which I look was, you see that paper crumbled and with crumbled layers everywhere. That is the first view which we see, and the second observation was, even with that fold and crumpledness everywhere, you see a continuous layer of the paper everywhere. So in the same way, in the same way I thought about looking this in this neighborhood of Charkov, where I see hybridity, even though there is stopness, and you see differentiation everywhere. In every scene you see, in the morning, some afternoon, in the evening, and even in the festival period. But at some point I visually experience that there are these multiple frames which are formed, and that's why you see what do we say that in that continuous path also there is this breakness of frame which is seen. And that's why thought of creating this three different frames of how the use of one space is used. So that is why that one of the the response of showing the hybridity in the Charkov was drawn. Yeah.
Thanks, Soham. Akshay, would you like to speak now, or should we move on to another respondent?
No, I'm just thinking about it. I think I'll continue.
Sure. We'll come back to you later.
Thank you, Vishwanath, for giving those comments. I'm sure I'll think of it.
Yes, and also I'd like to open up this whole idea of, like the different forms of representation that all three of them have taken, and especially because Akshay and Soham have both used the idea of the collage, where Soham goes in one direction, where his process is about unearthing almost. So then he has the idea of the overlap, and then it becomes sharper and sharper because he uses the idea of the trace to understand the form. Whereas Akshay goes in a different direction, and for him, these overlaps and these densities just keep building. And you have the conversation, you have like fragments of a ticket coming in, you have the signboards, you have unfolded drawings, and because of these overlaps, that sharpness becomes unimportant almost. So so he works with the whole idea of that smudgy, blurred, blunt drawing in order to speak of that, of an accrual, um, of these activities in urban form. Okay, Prasad, could we have you speak next?
Actually, as I was listening to all the three presentations, I was reminded of this drawing uh, about a building which was, was being imagined during the peak of the Soviet movement. It's almost like a building on a spring. So there are no foundations to the building, but the foundations are actually spring. And the building is built for workers who will come home to sleep. So in the night, the building will keep bouncing as if trying to put the workers off to sleep. Now there's a sense of I kind of like the idea of thinking about elastic architectural forms. Okay? And one thing to notice in all three is that the time of elasticity in all three is very different. Okay? Like in Akshay's, it's over a period of years. Like the sense of what is changing is over the years. As if the urban artifacts are something that kind of get built over a long period of time. That is kind of what you're stretching. The sense of time of this elasticity is something that I think it's important to note. Right? What kind of, because you kind of describe the whole neighborhood, right? But one is that you don't have to be a rocket, right? Kind of slow down, as you're describing, but also as you're presenting, right? Because I think a lot happens in terms of what kind of architectural moves that you start seeing when you describe slowly or start observing slowly, right? So there's a different sense of time. In Divya's, it's sort of the Ganpati kind of is the time in which these moments of elasticity appear, and in Soham's there is a sense of time which is very a very everyday time, right? Like it's kind of looking at time in a very everyday sense, but also in terms of the everydayness of infrastructure, in the sense of when water comes, a certain different kind of a space opens up, right? Or when the sun kind of goes down, a different kind of space is opening up, right? Or so the sense of time of this elasticity is something that I've felt is to be observed, right? How does the city kind of become elastic with a certain sense of time and the kind of activities and people who are making it elastic over a period of time, right? The second is that there's two ideas that were there. One was this idea of the fold, which I get the delusion sense of the fold, but you also then Divya, you also talk about the idea of the swelling, right? And as Vishwanath is saying that swelling is something that is inside, right? That is also pushing outside, right? While in a fold, right, that inside and outside is kind of not there in a paper, right? It's like a piece of paper, and the inside and the outside doesn't really exist, right? So you might want to clarify what you're thinking about. But what is interesting is that when you're in all of it, right, and actually all the three studies, when you locate, when you study the street becoming Ganpati festival, what happens to the neighborhood, right? Does it shrink? Right, which is something that is not clear. In the case of Soham also, like I get the sense of like the terrace is opening up, but what happens in the living room at the same time, right? Like the fold has two sides, or multiple sides to it, right? So what is the sense of the simultaneous shifts that happen as your what happens in the other spaces when one space opens up, right? Or even in Akshay's case, like you go through as if it's a linear sense of shifts that happen in a Maidan. But if something, people congregate in the Maidan, then what is happening inside the houses at the same time, right? And which brings me to something that I saw in all three is that, if what happens is that there's a sense of elasticity, there's a sense of swelling and sort of contracting that's happening. But in the drawings, right, what happens is that there almost seems like a containment, which is the walls, right? Like these hard-edged walls, right, which almost don't seem to be moving, right, along with the swelling and contracting and folding. Like, the walls, like the activities change, things come up, things go away. But somewhere the walls sort of become these boundaries that sometimes open up, but they don't really shrink and move with it, right? Now, I mean, they're all interesting studies, and I don't. What I felt was that it's an opportunity to actually look at how does architecture, in terms of the form building, but also in terms of material and technology, sort of, because you talk about the cloth and you talk about the mesh. How does architecture, both as a material and as a technological and material form, but also as a as a built spatial form, so start responding to these swellings, right? As something that gets constrained, and that is where I see the worry, in the sense of this high-rise building coming up, and that might not allow. And I feel like it's not so much about the high-rise building, but also that there's a sense of boundary and property that kind of comes with it, right? Which doesn't allow it to sort of accommodate these swellings or change with it, right? But one thing that I saw was that the outside seems to kind of swell, but the inside doesn't really change. And there's something to say also about the house, that house doesn't like we kind of sit on a house, and the house doesn't really sort of shrink and expand with what happens inside and outside, right? And the other question that came up was, architecture is so much about creating, right? Building and creating. But I was also wondering, if you're thinking about movements and sort of this expansion and contractions, is there also a possibility of thinking about architectures that sort of, it's a soluble architecture, where it sort of almost dissolves over a period of time, right? So things don't remain as such, but they sort of also dissolve at some point. So certain kinds of things can dissolve. They can't be long lasting. And so that new things can come up. So these are just thoughts that there were great drawings. All three of them actually, and the studies were, interesting in different ways, but they were all interesting studies, describing how these contractions and expansions and swellings and folding is occurring. The only comment I had was for Akshay, was to actually just kind of, slow down. Don't have to be a rocket. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Prasad. Would you like to sit with these comments for a while before responding? I think we could have Kush speak now. Kush?
Great, thanks, Apurva. Akshay, Divya, Soham, thanks for opening today's set of presentations, and wonderful. I think it was just a delight to sort of see your drawings, and it goes back to Apurva's sort of invitation to think how your drawings were deeply representative of the kinds of observations that you're making. So my first question to all three of you is about positioning yourself as a researcher. Since this is a dissertation project, it's a research project, how familiar were you or are you with the environments in which you're located and the environments that you're studying? And in what ways has your research refamiliarized yourself to the environments that you are drawing? So again, drawing as a way to open up ways of knowing a city or part of a city that you may otherwise be familiar with and or completely not familiar with. So I wanted to know what's your position as a student, as somebody who's studying these contexts. How are you located within these contexts? In terms of drawing, it was interesting, so in Akshay's case, we saw kind of a thickened transect, right? A series of thickened transects, which really inscribed anecdotes and voices and transactions in text and drawing form and visual form. And that was kind of, a good supplement to a very fast verbal narrative, but I think the transects were thick enough for me to pause and to be able to sort of appreciate the nuances. In Divya's case, there was this interesting sort of juxtaposition of perspectival drawings, right? Either from the top down or from the ground itself, looking at what these experiences feel like for somebody who's either at an elevated level or somebody who's on the ground. And with Soham, I think your choice was, I wanted to know, I mean, you what was consistent is this choice of sections. You continue to walk us through these spaces, but in a very sectional form. That was one consistent sort of marker in your drawing. And so the second question would be, when you start thinking through the relationships that you're studying and the kinds of definitions that you're giving to those relationships, how and at what point you start privileging a certain drawing form versus another. So wanted to get a sense of your own process. So first question was around your positioning, second was about the process, and third comes to the kind of the metaphors that you've used, right? So scaffold becomes a kind of a dominant thematic, material, conceptual framework for Akshay. Elasticity and elastic form becomes the kind of the noun and the verb for Divya. And hybridity becomes kind of a reality and a rationality for Soham. And the question here is, are scaffolds always, the thing about scaffold is that as much as they we can think of them as material artifacts with which to build a city or parts of the city, scaffolds are also taken down, right? After the construction is done, after the city is built, or a particular built form is completed. So what is it about the scaffold as it gets constructed, and what is it about the scaffold that gets kind of taken down and dismantled and put away for it to be taken up at a different time in the year or moment? Also, how can we think of scaffolds as not just a very bottom-up way of thinking about the city, but what are these scaffolds already existing in the city? So for you, Akshay, that was my question, that what are these either bureaucratic scaffolds or kind of physical scaffolds that are providing a kind of a mesh in which your kind of very lived-in scaffold is taking form and shape. So it's the coming together of scaffold is what I wanted to sort of draw your attention to. It's not just that there is a city and then the scaffolding is happening as a kind of a plugin, and then the city is built. So I wanted to get a sense of how these coming together of different scaffolds is unfolding in your project. With the elastic form, I agree with Vishwanath. I think that one of the questions was that what is the limit of that elasticity, right? Because you stretch and then it has a certain life to it and a length to it, but then it need not always remain tensed or stretched to the extent that you're thinking or possibly positing. But my question is about the labor of stretching. who's doing the work of stretching? And this brings me to the question of maintenance. Maintenance as a concrete material form making and a kind of a lived experience in the city that allows these moments to be stretched as and when, but also allows these moments to be stretched by people who are doing the work of building that city. So my question to you would be, again, who's doing the work of stretching, and not literally which groups of people, but how that kind of takes form and shape. And then what is the labor required to keep certain elasticities in place for even beginning to address the question, Divya, that you kind of very, not hurriedly, but kind of conventionally ended with, that now, gosh, these multi-storied apartments are coming up, and so what's going to happen to this elasticity? So I think if you think about the labor of stretching, you might also think of these new developments as contributing and or not to this labor of keeping things stretched to accommodate life. And to Soham, one thing about hybridity is its hyphenated nature, right? So I think in your project, it was interesting to see how not just the junctions are junctions by virtue of them being occupied by groups of people, but there is kind of codependency, interdependency, and then there is a kind of transition of different uses taking place. So how can we think of forms which are not just hybrid in terms of accommodating multiple uses, but also hyphenated? That as much as there is an activity of an ironing wala in the street, there's also somebody who's drawing papads, for example. And then what is that transaction? Goes back to what Vishwanath was asking, that what is the spatiality of that hyphenation? And that would be wonderful to sort of pause at, because then it shows that the threshold is not just a threshold by virtue of it having a certain physical form, but the hybridity is actually sustained by those hyphenations. So I think I'm drawing each of your attention to how do you sustain these infrastructures that you're thinking with, whether it's infrastructure of scaffolding, infrastructure of elasticity, or infrastructure of hybridity. So that's where I'll pause.
Thanks, Kush. Prasad, would you like to make your point now, and then maybe the students can respond to what Prasad, K, and Kush have had to say?
No. I think let them respond. Let them respond.
Okay.
Give them time.
Sure.
Can I respond?
Yes, of course, Akshay.
So I made a joint comment, not a comment, but what I was thinking about.
Yes.
So first, I think let's about Prasad. Like you said that how the houses are not allowing those interactions, or what is happening in the house, and it does not come out and mixes it with Maidan. Am I right? Am I taking your point right?
No, I was actually saying, I mean, it wasn't specifically for you, but everyone. The thing is that, when the Maidan becomes a center of or congregation, right? Everything kind of moves around there. What happens to the house, right? Or in Divya's case, when the street becomes where everyone sort of accumulates and moves and is, celebrating, what happens to the house? Or because what tends to what seems like in all the cases was there's a certain, and I think it goes back to what Prasad was saying, I think a couple of days back, there's a certain stubbornness to the house form, right? Like it can become, it opens a little, but the walls don't necessarily shrink and expand. Yeah. That the house, because we live in a world where the house becomes so precious, right? The house doesn't really shrink ever, right? Everything else is expanding, but the house only expands, right? Like it doesn't really shrink ever when the outside expands. So I was I was thinking that it might be because if there's an elasticity, there's always something that is, if something is expanding, something is also shrinking, right? If the Maidan is expanding, the walls are something is also shrinking at the same time, because that is also what the Deleuzian fold is. No, the Deleuzian fold is that there's only one material, right? There's nothing new that gets added. It's the same thing that is being folded in many ways. Right? It's not as if a new paper is getting created. It's the same form that is moving in different ways. Right? So what is shrinking as something is expanding? So that was that relationship was something I was talking about.
So yeah, I mean, I agree on that. I agree on what you're saying. Um, what the house here, which I was looking at, you said that there are walls which are, the type of housing which I was looking at contract and expanded, because city is something which I like. What I see at city is that it will have multiple places, like it has to have privacy, it has to have those walls, but also the elasticity. So we actually can't get away with that walls won't exist or walls will exist, but what our positions will be of understanding the correlations between them, the people who are using it by every day. So this whole research, which I like, the whole research was for me was, first of all, I live in this research in this neighborhood, and it is always about these stories and these talks which are happen in every day. Like when I am in the Maidan, I think of the houses around it, or I think of that kaki ka ghar who is going to provide me water, or I'm also thinking at the old at the park which is going on, or at the uh, puja which is happening in the temple, because everything is correlated for me. And what happens is that I look when I look at this, all these things, all these jumps which are happening simultaneously, and people also look at these jumps as things which are happening, ongoing processes which are there. And as you said, like as Kashi, as Akush said, that these scaffolds are of mix of these the bureaucratic power and the scaffolds of people which are there. I agree. I totally agree that those two scaffolds are mixing each other and forming these urban artifacts over a period of time. So urban artifact is not that just the urban artifact is made and then used, but it's always it again, it's a second way, like the community comes together and makes those urban artifacts. And how do I place myself in that whole position is where I understand these correlations, like I understand the differences which are happening, or there is a problem in movement, or there are things which are happening. And it's not that I'll go behind making those discriminations subtle. Like I won't go ahead and say ki you should not have discrimination, you should have, because sometime back only the point was made that city is where discriminations and different kinds of form happens, and that is what makes the city in itself. And where I'll be placing myself is that I'll try to blur those distinctions, those boundaries which are happening, if from my side, if it's possible, through making of something, or through actually thinking of something else or something like it's very rough in my mind right now, the way I'm responding it just uh, like it's going on. The questions are also going on, the questions of scaffolds, this question of house as walls, and how as I think how Vishwanath said that public space are meant for that independent claim to happen. And it is very striking that, yeah, I mean, the space. But again, the question is that why individuals, for it is made for individuals. I think those individuals are carrying forward those urban artifacts, and those urban artifacts are transforming over a period. It will happen, it will change, it will appropriate. By today it's for somebody, tomorrow it will be for somebody else, and that will continue the city's momentum and how it is living. And we are just like some characters playing some, again, a role only, again an individual who are playing certain things in this whole environment and making the environment in general.
But Akshay, if I may just quickly respond to that you're not just playing any role. I think because you're an architect and you are thinking of yourself as a citizen of that community, this is where the strength of your research comes in, and says that now as a critical spatial thinker and an architectural designer, which of those scaffolds need to be picked up? Which of those scaffolds need to be reinforced? Which of those scaffolds could be retained and used for the kinds of collaborative change making that you want to see happen in that area. So I think there's agency there. And I think that it would be good to then sort of, as you move to your 10th semester, to sort of repick as to which of those scaffolds, conceptual, bureaucratic apparati that need to be part of your project.
Yes. Totally agree. Totally agree to that question. I was actually, I wanted to say that, but I don't know how I was saying about those things.
Divya and Soham, would you like to come in?
Yeah. So, so thanks Prasad and Kush for that response. So first I'd like to go with the with Kush, what he said about where do you place yourself, in this study of, and then what are and then what how do you sense this project through your through other views. So to speak about this more, so the experience of this overall study was, the response which I took was through my experience, because I have lived in this neighborhood from since I'm born, and I've been experienced this this neighborhood, how every day is formed and how every day is evolved, and what activities do take place every day in this neighborhood. And then speaking about the fold, about what if focus on one activity which is going on, what happens to the उसके पहले क्या होता है कि it neglects at some other point ki, if some event is going on the courtyard, then what happens inside the house. So that unattended space which is formed, that is also experienced by the people living here itself, because they doesn't know what is happening inside the house when you are focused on the outside activity which is performing. That is one of the main observation which even I experience when one observation is going on, and to reflect in the in the drawing itself, it was difficult to to show exactly wo neglection kya hai wahan pe. Then 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 to speak about that overall change in the time ki, what happens in the morning, what happens in the afternoon, that overall change which I personally experienced, it also it is also in someone's personal opinion, because many of my friends who doesn't stay in this neighborhood, when they come here, they personally tells me, how do you manage to live here every day, because there are always people's are always looking you, what are you doing, what is happening inside the house, they always come and talk to you, what do you want, and without asking, there's a notion of, without asking anyone to come inside the house, they direct घर पे घुस जाते हैं. That is the kind of uh, uh, that is the kind of uh, activities and response from the people itself which we get. And living in this kind of neighborhood, it is a different kind of excitement, as well as sometimes it feels weird, even when someone is looking you constantly and you doesn't want them to look at you. So what happens, if you don't want to attend this outside people, you just have to shut the doors and window and not to attend them, but over a period of time, what will happen, this neighborhood itself, this active neighborhood itself allows you to open the doors and window, and it will you always there's curiosity ki bahar kya ho raha hai. And that is how that is how the response I get every day, to look constantly what is going on. Even to share one of the experience while presenting the jury, while presenting this presentation, there is a constant noise of going outside in my society, that someone is playing, there's someone constantly arguing about why you're keeping something in front of my house, don't keep here and take it away from here. There's constant these noises coming again and again in my ears, and then I'm trying to concentrate at this one point, but it is difficult to focus at one specific one specific presentation while it's going on. Yeah.
Thanks, Soham.
Can I respond?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. To respond to Prasad questions of the categorization of the whole thing into either fold or swelling. I too got confused between the concepts, and I thought I got to thinking, why is it necessary for us to categorize things? Because the city and these urban forms and neighborhoods lie in a lot of these gray areas. And fold and swelling, it's sort of this negotiation that at some period of time it's folding, but the time when the fold is not active, it is swelling. And then merging it with Kush's question of the representation, who is doing the merging Prasad's and Kush's question of one minute. What happens to the neighborhood when it shrinks, and when the inside doesn't change much, but the outside is shrinking, expanding. I'd like to like sort of give an example of this instance that happens. So there's this kid who's staying in that neighborhood who is a karyakarta, who wants to continuously do decorations and stuff. So he comes back home. He's like, I mala kachi katar hai. So he goes home, he takes the scissors, he goes and takes tapes, he goes XYZ things that he wants from home, be it from water bottle. He won't take it from his own house because his mother will be like, you take everything, you never get them back. So the wall becomes rigid to the festival. So he'll go to the neighbor or anyone who's on the ground floor and ask them for materials, and he comes back from there. And then if I imagine this as a drawing and how the walls need not be rigid, I can imagine the wall to bloat in a way where the furniture, or say the insides of the room are not really moving, but there's an effort, or that this constant pull by the kid who is trying to get out, or if he can't change his own space, then he's going to try changing some other space. Yeah, that's it.
I think we have time for a few quick points to be made by Prasad and Rupali. I'll just request you to be aware that it's 11:07.
Yes, but since we started 5 minutes late, following Sarovar's guidelines, we can take 5 minutes more. I mean, if the starts less late, then it ends late. No. I like this panel very much. It's very nice, and Akshay and Swam, your responses were really wonderful. Even Divya, I mean, really kind of and beautiful questions and beautiful responses. It's very nice. I think what's emerging is the softness of urban form, and that softness of urban form and its capacity to absorb and form over here not only physicality, but where life is folded into form, and that provides a softness to it, and I think then making it almost impossible to speak of form without life and life without form, and then that is something which the three presentations are really kind of struggling with, to speak of life and form together, and the drawings that emerge from there, and Apurva's kind of sharp point on the non-sharpness or smudginess or the bluntness or the overlaps of drawings, and then my architectural mind kind of looking for precision and sharpness and clarity, how does one kind of really, and whether the search or the urge for sharpness, clarity, and precision has a politics to it, whether there is a epistemological politics in this. Why am I looking for precision, sharpness, and clarity in that, and where does that precision, clarity, and sharpness take me instead of the bluntness, smudginess, and the overlaps? So I think those are the questions for drawings also, which we should take up as a school, as an institution. But how do you kind of work with, as architects, how do you kind of, work with soft form, so the softness of form, urban form, because urban designers have spoken about it quite often, but struggled with the language of, and then they kind of land themselves up into informality, messiness, and all of those kind of, categories. But it's really the softness of form which to be able to absorb and to be able to respond to, and to kind of, and then to kind of bloat, swell, become a fabric, become a, and sometimes also become paper. It's kind of, not like try putting a Muharram festival there, it will become paper, in the same street. So it kind of, it has a duality. So but I'm saying that, or duality, no, multiplicity actually, not duality. So the thing is that form, the impossibility of talking about form without life and life without form, and the drawing of it, how does, whether the search for sharpness and precision has its politics, and uh, what does the bluntness afford, what does the incomplete, the forming, what does it afford for architects and architecture, so yeah, these are the remarks. And I like, and the thing is, with Akshay's speed, I think the speed is in his mind actually, so he cannot get over it. He has to kind of, without, he cannot work without speed actually.
Thanks, Prasad. Rupali?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, I think Kush's question, where do you position yourself as researchers? And for this particular panel, and of course it goes for many others in the pandemic, because this idea of the self as the field kind of came in, and, because of the limitations. And in some ways, all three of them live in these localities, but in some ways their own positions were in the process. It's kind of a defamiliarization through the process of engagement, and then a refamiliarization, so kind of testing out concepts, and then kind of, allowing those concepts to kind of also be in some ways, malleable. You kind of look at observations and come back. And that's a kind of interesting way of engaging in research, that in some ways, and that's to go back to Sarovar's deductive, inductive, I think it's important for us to kind of be able to assert a theory from the field, and in that sense, when Akshay started with Rossi, the architecture of the city, there's still this kind of reverence to history and what came before. But then he brings in Lefebvre there and starts looking at the fact that the city is kind of a lived thing, and it's accruing and it's building, and so. And then he kind of goes onto the field, and it becomes much more than that, like it's not just the lived experience, but it's kind of it's series of power negotiations and all of that is kind of happening and building. Or when Divya speaks about this idea of the fold of the lues, but it kind of is, her observations are not able to be held in that kind of fold of the lues, but it's the something else, it's the swelling that is happening. Soham, who speaks about hybridity, but it's not so clearly hybrid. Hybrid is also very, very sanitized sort of category of thinking, but his own observations are much, much more messier than that. So in that sense, I think there is there needs to be, and this is for all of us, in some ways kind of thinking, and that's why it's nice that this group is kind of sitting and thinking together. What is the theory from from here that you kind of develop and work with? And there's of course people are speaking about, there's the southern urbanism and all kinds of things that we have been, people have been moving towards. But I think there is something here that is there in the field to be able to assert back, and all kinds of assumptions that come from our own sort of academic readings somehow get challenged, and in some ways to also have that be able to kind of validate some of those assumptions are important. And I know these are all beginnings, but I just feel like it's important to sort of flag there that it's important to kind of be able to have that confidence to build a theory from here, So yeah, that's it.
Ashwin, would you like to raise your question?
Yeah. I just had a question. If there is this softness of the form and the fuzziness that exists, then how does the architect get agency to engage with uh, the place? Matlab, it is to the to all the three people who presented and to everyone. Matlab, how will the architect engage with the urban form if
I'd like to add to this question where one of the respondents had said that Kush, I think, had said that what is the role of the urban designer after being in the field and studying how urban form is and all, because when you take the cases that Akshay has presented, the actors or the space or the form makers are the residents then, or the engager or the actors on the street, and not us who are designing the space or build form. So doesn't that agency shift from not us but to them?
Is Ashwin still around? So
Ashwin? Okay. I think Kush, you could go ahead and make your point and Ashwin can catch up with you on YouTube.
Yeah, so I think, it's interesting. I think so Ashwin's question would be a question for a lot of these students as well, that, if the city is unfolding the way it is and what the research is doing is providing a kind of a not just a lens on material agency, but also a lens on life and form, as Prasad was also mentioning. I think, but if we see ourselves as collaborative agents of change, then you are able to identify who are the not just groups of people or individuals that you'll be collaborating with, but also collaborations as lending themselves to thinking about the scale of change. I think one thing that we've not, I mean, your projects are very explicit in terms of positioning not just yourselves, but also the scale at which you think an intervention as a study or an intervention in terms of design might be possible. So I think that is what the architectural sort of mind and training and professionalism brings to the table, is being very kind of careful about the scale at which you locate yourselves, the context and the collaborations within which you operate, and then provide an imagination that either lends itself to different material artifacts, right? And so if you are a quote unquote professional office practice urban designer, then are you going to also lay out a few policy guidelines that could begin to alter the kinds of change that you're beginning to see in these neighborhoods and colonies? Or are you going to sort of intervene at the scale of the very coming together of a festival on a day-to-day, on a kind of a season-to-season basis, and then provide a kind of a material change and a reality which is different than what has been? So I think the agency of architects and architecture is plural and has always been. But I think the more we think of ourselves as collaborative agents of progressive change, the sort of the invitation to then think of the artifacts that come out of that collaboration are also plural. Sorry, there's a lot of kids in the area who are playing, so you can hear that in the background as well. So yeah.
So one of the point which I would like to mention was like, rather looking at the what should be the role of an architect, and how will the idea of the architect will respond to this, to form this kind of the neighborhood which was formed by all with three of us. This form of architecture was formed by the people living here itself, and not by any other outer agency, as mentioned by Divya. And rather, and then the next question over here, which I think which will come up, is like, what will be the form what will be the form of this architecture which will allow, you know, these opportunities and these interventions to be a part of, you know, this active and communicative neighborhood to, you know, still still perform, you know, its daily activities, and, you know, not be any boundary to stop performing what is happening right now. You know, this is one of the main question what I think which needs to be focused, rather, you know, the role of an architect would be.
Purva, if I may, just one, I know it's getting a little late. On the points picking up from Ashwin and what Kush was also trying to explain, I think, do we now need to rethink the role of an architect as a facilitator, from creator to facilitator, as we, see the different forms in the city? Because I think there was a time when during the modernist or wherever, as the architect is seen as this, planner creator who is planning the whole thing for the people. But also what we observe from this field is that artifacts, what I think of them as artifacts, are rather temporal and out of habits of people, the generation that is performing, practicing these things within the city. And therefore the architect then needs to assume the role of facilitator in these scene situations. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your comment, Asmita. I don't think we have any time. Prasad, did you want to make a small? Okay, no. Maybe we can we can take it forward in, as Prasad is saying, in the last panel. And
We'll do that.
thank
We'll
you
come
so
back. Lots
much.
of points, actually.
Sure,
I just wanted to say
sure,
one
sure.
thing. You know, like, you know, you
Yes.
don't find that if you think of yourself also as a fold, no? Like you're constantly folding into different things, right? You don't have to be one kind of an architect that, you know, you kind of fold with the situation and time. So it might be more.
Yeah, thanks, Prasad. That's a wonderful note to end on. And thank you to everyone who participated. It's been a wonderful and a very spirited discussion. And I know we couldn't open up all the comments and the ideas in depth, but I think that just speaks to the intensity of the questions raised and their responses. And with that, we'll break now. We meet again, we reconvene at 11:45. We move from this panel on urban elasticities to the next panel on urban frontiers, which will be moderated by my colleague, Sabha Giradkar. So thanks again and see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Apurva. Thank you, students. See you.
Thanks.